America, my name is... I am Osei-Frimpong, and you're watching this week's edition of The Black Athenians. I'm coming to you a little bit early today because I have things to do with my children. I have to run them to places and make sure that they're perfectly enriched. In my quest to be a good black dad. And, a lot of people say a lot of things about black dads. I put a lot of effort into being a decent one. And I think anyone who knows me would appreciate that. I also don't poo-poo cats like Richard Williams and Joe Jackson and Earl Woods. And there's a tennis dad out of Michigan. I can't remember his name. Anyway, it's not the easiest thing being a black dad, and some of them are doing good jobs, and sometimes their good jobs doesn't look like other people's good jobs. And I don't agree with all the decisions they made, but I do agree with the seriousness with which they took their work. And I like to think that I too take my work as a black dad that seriously, with a little bit fewer corporal punishment aspects of my parenthood, but with the same severity. So, I got to do some parenting things later on this afternoon, so I'm doing the show early. So, hello. And today we're going to talk about what to do about tax revenue. And I'm trying to do this local to Athens. So, we're going to talk about the SPLOST, the special local option sales tax that's being levied upon, that's being put on the ballot to be levied upon, the businesses and the people who use businesses in town. But I'm going to do it in a way that should apply to all sorts of towns, as long as they have generational black poverty surrounded by generational white wealth, which is a lot of towns in these United States. And we're going to talk about how to spend tax revenue to build like a more equal society, because when there's generational black poverty, it's surrounded by generational white wealth. It's not just a disparity you have to deal with. You have to deal with a predation. That means that there's generational black poverty because there's generational white wealth. And it's not just an accident that black people aren't being paid very well. It's so that we can generate more white wealth. So I'm going to talk to you about what government's supposed to do in order to rectify the situation, in order to make sure everybody's free, because you can't be free when you're someone else's tool. You can't be free when you're someone else's prey. And if you don't have an independent access to income or a good job, then you are just somebody else's prey. Like you are a tool of your boss. And with that, do you know how to hit the beat? Are we ready to do that? All right, go ahead and give me the opening.
To the beat, y'all. Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and I'm featuring your front. To the beat, y'all. Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and I'm featuring your front.
All right. So today we're talking about what to do with tax revenue to make black communities whole. And this will apply, I think this will apply to Columbia, this will apply to Gainesville, this will apply to Louisiana, this will apply to St. Louis, pretty much anywhere where there's generational black poverty, surrounded by anywhere there's white wealth. These are the decisions your government's going to make. And this the decisions the government can make at a local level. So specifically in Athens, I'm going to talk about the SPLOST. That's going to be a number that's somewhere south of $200 million, or about $200 million that's going to be gained through a 1% sales tax to be voted on in the next large election. And what do we do with this 1% sales tax? Now, there are some guidelines on what we can do with the SPLOST funds. Mostly it's infrastructure stuff. You can buy vehicles, equipment. You can't use it for operating expenses. Those monthly expenses like, people. But you can do buildings, and you give me a building, I'll create the people. You let me build it and they will come. And if you want me to build this, go ahead and go over to thefunkyacademic.com and give $5, $15, or $50 a month, because, I pay for rent at Broderick Flanagan Studio, and I want to be able to pay the people who help me out. I have some interns and an associate producer. I want to be able to pay them. And Matthew, I do pay the intern, but I want him to be able to pay more. Ideally, I want to be able to, once he graduates, I want to be able to hire him, because Matthew's fantastic. But I need to be able to hire him in a way that competes with other offers he might get, because he's a very smart young man. He's also black, so like I don't need to pay him that much money because we're cheap. But I want to pay him as if he were white. I want to pay Matthew as if he were white. And in order to do that, I need you to give a good amount of money on the website, thefunkyacademic.com. And I also want to get some new equipment and have a mobile setup so that I can do some of these like on some of these shows on location. But that takes money. For the mobile setup it's going to be somewhere south of $10,000. So I need to be able to save $10,000 to get the mobile setup, because that way I can do this kind of political analysis in like the lobby of the city council meeting, or like in any place there's a decent Wi-Fi connection. And that's what you want out of your kind of local political thought. So we're going to talk about what to do with the SPLOST money. And it's going to be somewhere south of $200 million. And the way the Athens-Clarke County City Government organized this is they had a Citizens Advisory Council that vetted the first run of the projects and got the list down to the list that the 21 citizens, decided that this is what they need. And then that list went to the elected commission, and then the elected government defined their options and what they wanted, and then the government's options are what are going to be on the ballot for the city or the county to decide what to fund. All right, so we're going to talk about a few of these options. First of all, you have to know that of the about $200 million plus or minus, $1 million here, $1 million there. Pretty soon we'll talk about real money. But of the about $200 million, the big lobbies wanted a new court system, a new judicial center, because the old judicial center isn't in very good repair. Ideally, in a well-ordered world, we just want to make the judicial center so bad that nobody wants to work there, so we have to just figure out ways to put fewer black men in jail, because that's who goes through the judicial center. If you don't believe me, go to the current court and just sit, and you will just see a parade of black men, just a parade of black men going through. A host, just all sorts of shorter, smaller, bigger, thinner. There'll definitely be black men though. And there'll be 13 or 14% of the city, but some 60% of the jail. And then those are just the people in jail. Of the people who would just go through jail, we're even a higher percentage. So, or through the process, we're even a higher percentage. So we're just plaintiffs being Negroes, but we want our judges to have nicer chambers, and we want our public defenders and our prosecutors to have nicer chambers. So they want to put it was initially $60 million into building a new judicial center. I think that's a problem. You know who also think that's a problem? The public defenders. The public defenders with their little cubicles and their huge course loads were like, don't spend $60 million on making a nice judicial center. The public defenders did not want that, but everybody else did, because they want, Wi-Fi and all that. So that's what a big push for the SPLOST was. The Citizens Advisory Committee that vetted all the projects also did not want to put the $60 million into the new judicial center, because it turns out that we should just probably be in the business of making fewer people in jail, like fewer people who have to go through the judicial process. And there are ways to do that, right? So that was one program that was going to suck up a lot of the 1% sales tax. Another program that was going to suck up the sales tax was the Classic Center. The Classic Center was built for the '96 Olympics. And, if we look down, it's kind of got a dubious history, because the Classic Center is a nice convention center. I went to see some roller derby there. People have their weddings there. Black people don't really have things there, but we work there, like serving white people stuff. That's kind of like America. The 5 Negroes who will have like their little thing, they will say like, no, it's important for the black community. No, man, no. It's the Classic Center exists. It's like Beyonce concerts, or maybe even Beyonce. Like they don't, like you go to a Beyonce concert, you will not see a lot of black people. You go to a Kanye West concert, you will not see black people. You go to a Killer Mike concert, you will not see a lot of black people. you'll see a lot of white people who can pay the 70, who have the disposable income to go to concerts and time to go to concerts and get to concerts and pay for parking to go to concerts. All like your Chance the Rapper. You go to a Chance the Rapper concert, you will not see, black guys from the South Side of Chicago. And you go to an event at the Classic Center, and you go to a wedding at the Classic Center. That wedding will not be black. The servers will be, there'll be like a Paula Deen affair. The servers will be black and they'll have white gloves, but the wedding will not be black. So and then when they built the Classic Center, they gave a 15-year exclusive contract to like this white catering company. And you know what a 15-year exclusive contract to a white catering company means? That means any of your delinquent white nephews and cousins who are like in the middle of their pill addiction can still have a catering job as a manager. So they can just be loaded in the back somewhere at the Classic Center. So the Classic Center isn't meant to make black people real money. It's made to make white people real money, and then a handful of hand-picked Negroes who may have like shuffled and jived appropriately can be event planners and do whatever, and might end up making kind of real money. Not white people real money. Remember, because when I say real money, for white people I mean $70,000, because that's when white people start considering themselves making real money. If you talk to a white person who doesn't make $70,000, they always complain about how poor they are. If you talk to a black person who makes $45,000, they talk like the Jeffersons, like they've moved on up, like they've arrived. You talk to a white person who's making less than $70,000, they talk about how poor they are. You talk to a black person who's making $45,000, they talk like they've made it, and they're probably holding up other like entire neighborhoods and stuff. So that's the state we're in. And the Classic Center does not make black people who make $70,000. It makes a lot of white people. It makes white people who make that much money, in the upper management, and people who make more in the ED role, in the executive director role. So the Classic Center wanted $34 million as part of the public-private partnership that will create some $7 million in revenue, apparently. And a lot of jobs for $11 an hour. And, when I hear a job for $11 an hour, I think that job will not move black people out of poverty, especially in a town like Athens, where we have only a 3.5%, 4% unemployment rate, which means everybody works and nobody makes money because we have a 38% poverty rate. We have public housing. Everybody works. Only white people make money. Because we do have an $8.5 billion GDP. So everybody works, only white people make money. That's Athens, Georgia. And the money that's made in Athens, Georgia, is shunted off to Oconee County, the neighboring county, the white flight county, whose biggest employer are Athens employers. So the hospitals and the university are Oconee County's biggest employers, and those hospitals and universities are based in Athens, Georgia. All right, so in a well-ordered world, for me, I want to claw back our money, and we need to organize a commuter tax because the managers and the business owners and the property owners in Athens live in Oconee County and then pay taxes in Oconee County, and then that ends up reproducing a predatory relationship between Oconee County and Athens County, because I think it's kind of a colonial dynamic where you go into Athens, you make your money here, then go back to Oconee County and pay your taxes. But this is not just Athens. This is also Richmond, Virginia. This is also pretty much anywhere where Mobile, Alabama. This is also New Orleans. Anywhere where there's a cool place where there's generational black poverty surrounded by white wealth is going to have this story of kind of a colonial relationship where somehow through state taxes we end up paying for the roads that facilitate the white flight / expropriation of the city center's goods, right? So the Classic Center is going to create a lot of $11 and $12 an hour jobs for black people and a handful of $70,000 and $80,000 jobs for white people who live in the white flight county next door. I have a problem with that. just because I don't think you get generational uplift with 70. And when I hear about an $11 or $12 an hour job, I feel like that's very good for white landlords, making sure that black people have an $11 an hour job. Because if you have an $11 an hour job, that means you can save for a decade and still not come up with a down payment. Because you know what's going to happen in that decade? Your transmission's going to go out. And if you make only $11 an hour, if you only make $11 an hour, you don't have money for a transmission and a down payment. That transmission wiped out your whole livelihood. You know, there's a lot of money. The way we talk about money is bad. You don't save your way into real money in America. That's just not how it works. Not making $11 and $12 an hour. You don't save your way. You don't even really invest, because your stocks you can buy with the savings you make off $11, $12 isn't going to be a real investment. You can get one Apple stock and then pretend that you're a baller. No, that's not how it works. The best thing you could do with your $11, $12 an hour is to hope to organize to get paid $19 and $20 an hour. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. What's up? Oh, good. So the total SPLOST is going to be $300 million. The total SPLOST is going to be $311 million. How do you spend that money to in a way that actually does work on the 32 to 38% poverty rate, depending on who you ask? And black poverty, it's going to be over 50, I think. And it might be closer to, I don't know. If we're talking just $24,000 for a family of four, it might be 50. But if we make it like under, I think 80% of the black people in Athens, like household income is going to be under $55,000. Yeah. I think that's true. I think that's true. They don't racialize these numbers because they're scared of what the numbers will be. But if we make the cutoff, and if you don't make $55,000, if you make $55,000, you're not necessarily being predated upon by other people, but you're not making moves either. That's enough for defense. $50,000 in Athens, Georgia, making $50,000, making $55,000, that's enough to play defense against white money. It's not enough to actually make moves on your own. You need $70, $80, $100, you need $80,000 a year household income to make moves on your own. If you make 55, it's enough for you not to be someone else's food. But then black people, we don't make 55. Not in numbers, not at the community level. So poverty rate's 38%. Black poverty rate, we don't know. I think it's closer to 60. The reason we don't know is nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to commission that study. All right, so space modernization. Space modernization is what we call the judicial center that's going for $77 million of the $300 million. And that's the $300 million of the SPLOST, $77 million of it's to the space modernization plan. The space modernization plan is a consolidation of a few resources and a very nice judicial center. The Citizens Advisory Committee did not want the judicial center, but the mayor and commission decided, well, if we call it a space modernization plan where we consolidate other offices, including the assessor's office and a few other offices, and include the judicial center, maybe it'll pass because we won't call it just like $60 million to make it more convenient to incarcerate black men, which it is. It's $60 million. Like of that $77 million, $60 million of it is going to make it just a more convenient facility to incarcerate black men. All right. Not a fan of that. That's how it happened. Another project is the mobile research lab for $500,000. Right? So is this mobile research lab going to be good for the black community? Well, it's going to allow the University of Georgia, my institution, the one that I am a grad student in and I teach a class, to study the black community. But is it going to be good for the black community? I don't know. We have a history of this in the United States. Give me the picture of the Tuskegee. We have a history because we asked, all right, so is this mobile research unit going to actually treat the people it studies? And the answer was like, no, it's just going to study them. Well, there was another research facility that studied black people but didn't treat them. It's called the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where like black people, they had syphilis, and instead of treating them, which we could do, we just kind of studied them and saw what it would do to their minds. It turns out not good things, that is, as it ate their brains. So we have a history in the South of studying black people without treating them. And this is tax dollars to create a mobile research facility that studies people without treating them. Can you get me the other, I think I have another, click the eye. No, that's a board of direction. All right, so so this is just another, we have tax dollars. Okay, that's fine. We have tax dollars going to a UGA project. That's University of Georgia. They're the ones doing the research facility that it's going to be used primarily by them in order to study, let's be honest, us. And there are going to be a lot of it's called a mobile medical lab, but they're not going to treat people. So I don't know what to call that. So it's going to be, there are University of Georgia professors, white ones, who write grants and get paid a lot of money and use those grants to study black people. And they study things like grit and how gratitude works and things that like, they get paid a lot of money to study black people in a way that makes it convenient to oppress black people. So they'll study that, like, the problem with black poverty isn't like the generational terrorism. It's the fact that like we don't teach gratitude, or that we're not gritty enough, or we don't have a financial literacy. If you make $11 an hour, financial literacy is not your problem. If you make $12 an hour honestly, if you make $14 an hour, $15 an hour, financial literacy is not your problem. Your problem is your finances aren't enough for you to be in this game in America. White people can make $15 an hour and have good lives because they're going to get like a windfall when their white baby boomer grandparent dies, or they can make a call to their white parent when their car breaks down. It's not the $15 an hour that's paying for their new car. It's an uncle or an aunt or startup capital for their business. They didn't get that from saving their $11 an hour job. That $11 went to rent and some networking things maybe. But the startup capital, the real startup capital, came from a phone call or a series of phone calls. Even people talk about crowdsourcing. The way white people crowdsource, they're not getting money from strangers. They're getting money from friends and family. And crowdsourcing is just the mechanism from which their friends and family give them money. If you don't believe me, try going to a black crowdsourcing site. It's sad. I used to have, I could do a whole show on what crowdsourcing won't do for the black community. Because you have to understand that the median incomes matter, right? So median wealth, right? The median wealth of a white family is about $116,000. The median, that's the middle. There's as many over as there are below. Median wealth, $116,000. The median wealth of a black family is about $1,700. Right? So if you're worth $116,000, you could put $200 to your cousin's GoFundMe campaign. If you're worth $1,700, you cannot put $200 to your cousin's GoFundMe campaign. So anyway, SPLOST, these tax revenues supposed to create the quality of civic infrastructure that the market's not going to provide. I don't think it does so. The way the projects are designed, the mobile research lab for $500,000, I think the UGA should fund that. Also, when you talk to local politicos about what we can and can't do with UGA doesn't pay taxes. They use a lot of land, and we control their water and trash to a certain extent, and we could charge them more. And we could play a little bit harder ball politics with that. And they also depress wages for the entire city because they start at $11 an hour and they have dicey working conditions agreement. They're non-unionized. So when the biggest employer in town depresses wages for the people in town while actually paying their white managers pretty well to live outside of town, that's a problem. That's a problem because it's actually supporting a predatory labor relations agreement. So what we could do with UGA is bargain for better working conditions and bargain for a union, right? So instead of funding their lab and asking nothing for a return, we should say, all right, we'll put $500,000 for a mobile research lab, but I'm going to need you to, as a matter of your orientation for all new employees, bring in a union rep to talk to the employees about the options that the union can provide. Right? That's something UGA can do. And that's something that would be good for the city insofar as it would get rid of the city's abject poverty rate by making working conditions here for the entire city better. And also, make public safety less of an issue because black people who make good money don't steal for little money. Like if you're making $22 an hour at your job, you're not going to steal. You're going to come home with less stress. So there's going to be less violence in the house. Like that's just the case. So if you care about public safety and you care about making workers in black communities and workers in Athens whole, then you push UGA to unionize them before giving them or allow them to unionize themselves before giving them $500,000 for their research laboratory. Right? So we do have power with UGA. We just are bad at wielding it because we're not used to wielding it. Because honestly, in order to wield it, you're wielding it on behalf and to support black communities. And in general, we're bad at wielding power in support of black communities. It's a muscle that we have not developed. Right? Also on this list, so I want to take out the $500,000 mobile research lab until it's renegotiated to allow unions to talk to employees. Because right now, UGA also has, for its employees, a 6-month provisional hire. That means you start out on 6-month probation. That's a long time to be a probation. One of my buddies just got fired for not being enthusiastic enough. He was a black guy on an all-white crew. He got fired for not being enthusiastic and communicative enough. Do you know what that means? That means he didn't laugh at his white boss's joke and he didn't do all the right tap dancing. Like that's a 6-month probation. That needs to be renegotiated. That means it needs to be negotiated. And the way you negotiate with that kind of power is collectively as a union. So these horrible labor conditions then just metastasize to other smaller employers in town. And metastasize is the right word because it's like a cancer. So UGA unionizes, then other employees will have to match the working conditions of like janitors at the University of Georgia, who were disproportionately black and now Latino, but still black. But the way the city can negotiate to make the city whole is to say, like, I won't give you this research lab until you allow union reps to talk to every single new employee as a matter of employee orientation. Unions get a half hour. Union reps get a half hour. You dig? That's something we can do, but you need actually commissioners who know their job. All right, so there are a few things that are on the list that are there so that we pass the big list. So when the SPLOST is on the ballot, it's just going to be one line item with some 20-odd projects. 25? 29? 39 projects. 36 projects, right? So it's going to be one line item with 36 projects. The big projects are going to be the space modernization / jail for black people, justice system, and the Classic Center arena. That's going to be like $100 million of the dollars to go to those. But in order to pass it, you need to throw in things like a library on the east side of town, which is where I live, and I would very much like a library. But in order to pass it, so that's on there. And there's a youth development center. The CEO of Clark County School District has an idea that we need more youth development centers because that's how you combat actual poverty. And so they have a youth development center that was for $14 million. It got cut down to $4 million. And the plan is that's going to have an early childhood aspect. It's going to have a sports aspect and a business aspect, right? So the sports aspect is pretty much going to be run by the Boys and Girls Club. I think sports are fine. But youth development sports, sports do not have, I think they're overprescribed for Black communities. I think sports are overprescribed for Black communities and other things are underprescribed for Black communities. I think we need more richer theater programs and arts programs, because the idea of these as youth development programs is that we don't let Black people do a lot. We don't let kids do a lot of things. We don't let them run whole things. So they have to develop discipline and develop long-term planning and rigor and how to work with other people and how to listen to other people through sports and also the arts. This is why a liberal arts education is an education into how to use your freedom in a productive and healthy way. Right? So, and sports is a way to develop that. It is a way. It's not the only way. It is a way. Another way is music. I was a very good athlete. I set records and things in high school on the track. I was very good at that. I was also a very good classical musician. They were both important to my development. Not one more important than the other. And I would rather actually have and to be a good classical musician, you need a classical music infrastructure. Can't just be schools. You need private lessons and then youth orchestras, community orchestras. In the same way, in order to be a really good athlete, you can't just play school sports. You need a youth development league outside and all of that other way and all of these other things. So I'd rather have a classical music infrastructure. Honestly, one of the reasons why I have to do the show early today is because my kid has cello lessons at 5 o'clock, and I got to make sure that she gets to her cello lessons because that's important to her development as a free person. Music's important. It teaches you how to listen to people and teaches you time and tempo and how to read other people and pay attention to other people and match pitch, all of these, and how to set a goal for a concert that you then go back and practice in your own room for. And it teaches you a sense of beauty. And if you have a sense of beauty in music, that sense of beauty is transitive, and excellence in beauty is transitive to other aspects in your life. So you'll kind of look at harmony in your interpersonal relationships in a different way, and beauty in your interpersonal relationships in a different way. And think about the whole in your working relationships in a different way. You'll be a better boss because you know about what excellence and beauty and harmony looks like in not just music, but in your working relationships, in your marriage, in your political actions, in your whole community. One of the reasons I can do this show right now is the sensibility that I developed as a very good classical musician. It's a rigorous enterprise that kind of developed in me the sensibility to see wholeness, not just in the piece of music, but also in my city, and lead that city to a quality of wholeness. So this youth development center is sports-based and entrepreneurship-based and early childhood development. I worry about the entrepreneurship focus of the sports center because it's the money is going to go to build a building that it's itself going to be run by this group called Junior Achievement, the Junior Achievement Network. So I have a list of their board directors. You can go just put in JA Network or Junior Achievement Georgia. Can you give me that list? It's one of the pictures. It's one of the pictures. All right, so you have to ask yourself. You have to click on the eyeball. I'm training new interns since Matthew's not that one, different eyeball. Yeah, I'm training new interns because Matthew has a very good summer job. Yeah, good. All right, so this is the list of the board of directors of Junior Achievement. You got bankers and management consultants, they're all white. because you got bankers and management consultants and who can you read what are some of the titles?
Board members?
Yeah,
Mark Adams, Regional Director, Chris Brooks.
give me the companies. Yeah, I got Chase and like this is just a Chick-fil-A person there and a Chick-fil-A VP of external affairs. Cricket Wireless, some insurance problems, real estate developers, B of A, like all these people who want to teach your children how to be entrepreneurs. But you got to understand that all of these people these are the board of directors for the Entrepreneur Center. Coca-Cola. You have to understand that this board of directors isn't really looking at. Is this the board of directors you want in charge of the mind of your child? Not just your child, your community's children, right? Because some of your community's children are going to actually be working for a living. And so not everyone gets to be a director. And I have a thing about like everyone pretending that like everyone's going to be like a king or a queen or calling each other kings or queens, when really most people are peasants. There's one king for every like few thousand peasants. We need to make a world where peasants live okay. So like these guys teaching entrepreneurship isn't really, in the name of workforce development, isn't really what we need necessarily, because do you want these people in charge of the black mind? And make no mistake, Bobby Wright is 100% right when he says that the big war in America, the one war that we need to fight for and that we're losing because we don't get into the fight is the fight for the black mind. So JA Achievement put together a bunch of money to operate a business center as long as we build the building, and they're going to put together and they're going to teach our children. And I don't want these people on that list in front of you in charge of the black mind, especially when the aim of this youth development center is academic success and workforce development. Workforce development can look like a lot of things. For example, when I was making $11 an hour as a cashier, I organized a union at Berkeley Bowl in California. I was one of the main organizers. I was pretty good at that part of the job, right? So at the end of the process, I made $19 an hour. I was a cashier that made $11 an hour. I organized a union. At the end of the union organizing drive, I made $19 an hour, right? That's a pretty good increase in my quality of life. Let me tell you, my quality of life increased quite a bit. Because at $19 an hour, you can date really well and you can save up and go back to school, and which is what I did. I dated very well and I saved up and went back to school. $11 an hour, both those things were hard to do. I think it was expensive, and dating is not cheap, especially I like dating attractive women. But at $19 an hour, I could do that. So workforce development for me wasn't necessarily, hey Mary, workforce development for me wasn't necessarily a matter of becoming an entrepreneur. It was a matter of being able to organize for a union to move from $11 to $19 an hour. And so that's the kind of workforce development we need. Workforce development that makes sure that the people at the bottom, the people picking up stuff, because black people, we do pick up stuff. We also clean and we do windows, that they're making a good living and have a fair say in their working condition. Because just because you do windows doesn't mean that you need to be treated like a slave. You need, like, everybody wants their windows cleaned, so pay the people who clean the windows a good amount of money. And we have the amount of money, that just means we need to pay some of the owners a little bit less. People make money in Athens. People do make money. There's this notion that like people in Athens, Georgia, and people in Mobile, Alabama, and people in Columbia, and people in Richmond, Virginia don't make money. No, people do make money. They just don't pay it to black people. Like that's not, so this idea that these are all poor towns, even like Birmingham, people make money in Birmingham. They just like aren't black. Like people make money, they just aren't black. And that's the problem. So workforce development doesn't necessarily mean turning everyone into a black owner of capital. It means, honestly, teaching your workforce how to negotiate for their fair share. And that's the kind of youth development we need. And I wouldn't mind a youth development center that just focused on labor rights. Like that, like a youth, like instead of entrepreneurship, a youth development center that just focused on making sure the next generation of black workers, knew how to organize for their own rights. That would be a youth development center that would actually, I think, markedly change the trajectory of our youth. Because even if you make one entrepreneur or a handful of entrepreneurs, there's still a few hundred other black people who are going to be working at subpar conditions and don't need to be working at subpar conditions if they could have the support and the infrastructure to organize for better working conditions and wages. Right? This just doesn't mean $14, $15. It means $20 and $20 with unions and with benefits. Remember, when white factory organizers organized, they didn't organize for just like a pittance. You had in the Midwest, you had factory workers who just did this all day making $30 and $35 because that's like in the 70s. And I was talking, and I was listening to some guy a white guy, Mike Hunt? I don't know. Well, a white congressman out in Ohio, he was like, look, the fight for 15 is good, but I'm watching jobs in my town, good union jobs, factory jobs that went from $30 and $40 an hour. They're not excited about working for $15 an hour. They don't want that because they used to work their factory job at 30 and 40. All right. That's how they thought of their life. So workforce development doesn't necessarily mean training everyone to be a baller. And it doesn't mean training everyone to be a sycophant for $11 an hour. It means training the workforce the future workforce and how to fight for $20, $22, $25, $30, $35 an hour for being a janitor. In a world where there are executive directors and managers who make $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 an hour. Even the university pays its directors a good amount of money. I think the median administrative salary is over $150,000, or right at $144,000. So we need, in terms of workforce development, and when people talk about workforce development and people talk about youth going towards workforce development, it needs to be training them in how to organize for their fair share of their wages. And that's what we need, workforce development. Not financial literacy, not entrepreneurship. Because if you're teaching people who make $11 an hour about financial literacy and entrepreneurship, you really you're a part of the problem. I said it, and I'll say it again. You can quote me on that and put that on Twitter. Their biggest problem is that the fact they're making $11 an hour. So that's what I wanted to talk about. And I want to actually kill this SPLOST in 2020 and then redesign it, because if you kill the SPLOST in 2020, that just means it can come back the next year. And I want to redesign it with a kind of more mature set of priorities. But right now, there's some good things on it that are there just to provide cover for some of the dicier projects, right? There's a $13 million build out for an East Side library, which I support, living on the East Side, and we need a library because there are only two real centers of populations. There's the one over on the West Side by the West Side Library by Clark County. It's Clark School, the high school. And because the library there, the school's there. What else is there? Alps Road, the junior high school's there. It's like a really good, which one? Clark Middle. It's a good place to put civil service services, because that's actually a nice place, a nice hub, and it's a transportation hub. It's easy to get there by bus. Another place happens to be over by me. Another place happens to be over by me, which is the Gaines School, East Side Publix, Barnett Shoals, and like so you Green Acre. That's where I live. So like it's not just about me; it just happens to be by me. But if you're gonna put something, it's not the worst place to put it because it's easy to get to by bus. It's right by the high school, the other high school in town. It's right by the other junior high, one of the other junior high schools in town. It's easy to get to by bus, and it disproportionately serves poor black people. So we could, like, if you're going to use taxpayer money to build a civic infrastructure, that's a good place to do it. And if you're going to use the youth development center, that's a good place to do it, but development can't just be like entrepreneurship for people who don't make money. Like entrepreneurship classes for people in public housing who make $8 an hour isn't really what they need. What they need is to make, and their children, what their children need is an education in how to do what they're taught to do in a way that earns $22, $25, and $30 an hour, right? So like, there's no reason why we can't pay sanitation workers $20 an hour. Because honestly, I don't want to pick up trash. I don't want to pick up trash. Yeah. Thank you. I don't want to be a sanitation worker myself. So that means that people who do that work need to be paid for the work that they do that I don't want to do. And so that's a real kind of workforce development. That's what real workforce development means. And yeah, so do that, talk about it on those terms, build the center out by the Gaines School corridor area, which is where you can get to it by public transportation. And it's by where all the schools are. And what there's a woman in my neighborhood who's a fantastic musician who's starting a music kind of nonprofit school because the school music programs aren't enough for serious musicians. You also need like a community music infrastructure. You need like a place where kids can go and get private lessons, and also a place where they can have little recitals. And you just need a music infrastructure, just like you would need a sports infrastructure. This isn't necessarily to say that all of these kids are going to be professional musicians any more than like youth basketball leagues mean that all should be designed with the idea that all kids are going to be professional basketball players. No, it's just a way to develop the discipline and the sensibilities of youth. Serious music and classical music is a way to do that. So she wants to start a classical music school. She can't afford rent in any of the buildings in that area, but that would be a perfect program to fold into the youth development center if we weren't so sports focused. And when you talk about black people, the only way people think about black youth is and black youth development is through sports or entrepreneurship, but you're talking about people who don't have any money. So I don't know. I think that's part of the con. So what I would want is a serious music and theater and debate center to go along with, in the name of youth development, not necessarily entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is fine for what it is, but like I would rather have, debate, music, even theater to give a bigger pride of place. Because we have an entire tennis center. If we have a tennis center in town, we could have like a youth worker center, like that just deals with economic development from the worker point of view. Like we can do that with tennis. We could do that for a place for debate and policy debate and unions. So I want to kill. So that's where you should spend tax money, building this kind of infrastructure so the people can fight for themselves. And then some people will say like, look, so some people, when I talk about unions, are like, I always talk about unions. Unions are historically racist. Like, yeah, so are American schools, but you don't find people talking about American, like, anti-school rhetoric as being racist. No, American schools are racist and they teach white supremacy. That doesn't mean that you give up on education. It means that you reform education. Unions are racist, but that doesn't mean you give up on unions, as if negotiating with a black boss as an individual is that much better than negotiating with a white boss. It really isn't that much better. Like, it really isn't. Like, I don't want to negotiate with Oprah or Jay-Z I want a union to negotiate as a collective, or some. I don't, and then same putting a woman in charge isn't going to change anything either. Like, tell me that negotiating with Hillary Clinton somehow going to be better for me as like a poor black person. No, she had slaves. She talks about when she had slaves and liked it. Yeah, she talks about when she had slaves as the governor's wife. Convict labor who would clean her governor's house in Arkansas. She was like, "Ooh, I didn't know how much I would like it." And then she said something about how like the violent offenders are actually the most nice, the murderers were actually the most nice and genteel. Yeah, so that's Hillary Clinton. I don't want to negotiate wages with her. She likes having slaves. So negotiating with a black boss and trying to create like one or two, a handful more black bosses doesn't do anything for the black masses. And I'm thinking in terms of black masses and the development we need and the politics we need to support black masses negotiating for themselves. And that's why I also don't want the politicians necessarily dictating working conditions. I want unions dictating working conditions because politicians are still captured. I want unions battling out with chambers of Congress for the politician's ear. Because right now the Chamber of Congress owns the politicians, and it owns like conventional wisdom and what we think of as conventional wisdom because they have the money. White guys got together, put their money together, and now they own like how our minds pretty much. I need workers being enabled to get together and launch a counter attack, and so that then the politicians can think about the whole. Because right now one set owns the referees. And I want both people like battling for the referees. And the referees should be our elected officials. But in order to do that, I need the elected officials to fund getting the workers, getting the weight up for their workers, because the workers are not in a fighting position right now, and that's why we lose. All right. So I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to vote no on the SPLOST that comes up just because I want to just push the project. I think it was hurried through. And this is how it was hurried through. We got an okay commission that was elected, but the problem is they're all new. So they got hosed by institutional interests. And institutional interests, the lobbyists are always like the money. And this is one reason why this is the argument against big government and against term limits, right? The argument against big money is it then consolidates a lot of money into one pool and makes a nice juicy target. Big money in government. It makes a nice juicy target for a private interest to come and take and capture, right? And that's kind of what happens with the Classic Center. You got this big government pool of like $300 million, and then the Classic Center comes in because they have private interests with they know who to bribe and how to bribe, and a lot of our people are bribed, and then gets, their cut of it. The other problem with term limits is that as the commissioners cycle in and out, the people who stay are the lobbyists, right? So this guy, Paul Kramer, give me a picture of Paul Kramer. Paul Kramer, he's been there he's seen commissioners come and go, and there's always been Paul Kramer. Paul Kramer does not work for you black people. He hires the occasional black person to be the black face of his white supremacy, but Paul Kramer does not work for you. And the problem is with new commissioners, he's the only one with institutional knowledge. He's the only one who knows who to bribe and how and when. So so he got his $34 million, and he knows the way to get his $34 million is to also put in an East Side library on the list. So voters vote for the library for $13 million, but he takes his $34 million for his arena. And you best believe, I just talked to a guy who had to negotiate with Paul Kramer. He's like, Paul Kramer does a few things. He gets petulant. He starts and then threatens to just take his ball and go home. So you got to call his bluff. He gets petulant, and white people do get petulant. If they take it, they say like, oh, "You're insulting me." And yes, I do insult you. Like you're a lobbyist that just took a good chunk of this center. So yeah, petulant, and then they take what they take, and then they threaten you, and then so you have to leave. You have to be able to walk away. That's how you negotiate with Paul Kramer. You walk away a few times, and if you're not willing to walk away, he gets what he wants, and that is unfortunate for the world, except for the handful. Because like what'll happen is like 100 people will make $11 an hour, and through enough like whatever, they'll end up making they like 2 or 3 will end up with decent jobs out of it. And so then he'll find those 2 or 3 and use them as a story to keep the other 100 in place. That's white supremacy in action. They don't need Negro success. They need Negro stories of success. And so they will just give enough success to promote the story that will then keep everyone else in line. And blaming themselves. So I want... and I know that the fix was in because the arena didn't get past the Citizens Advisory Committee, but the mayor and commission put it on because it's easier to bribe mayors and commissions than it is to bribe like 21 random citizens. And with that, if you like what I say, remember the things I do here pretty much make me unemployable. So I'm going to need you to go to thefunkyacademic.com and give money. $5, $15, or $50 a month to keep me doing it. Because what I'm saying isn't just about Athens, Georgia. It's about everywhere else with, generational black poverty, whose, grandparents were picking up stuff, and generational white wealth, whose great-grandparents owned people. And with that, peace.